Welcome to From Thinking to Inking, Episode 1, Part 1. For this episode, I'm talking with Caitlyn Mitchell, the self published author of The Roaring Boys, and the topic of this episode shifted. It was a delightful and long interview that will be broken into five-ish parts, and in this first part, we don't really even get into the book at all. Instead, we have a long and interesting talk about her influences, inspirations, and her writing journey from its beginning to this book's publication, as well as some brief discussions on the current landscape of art and entertainment. Caitlin, thank you for being my first guinea pig into this podcast and being the first person to experience me as an interviewer.
No, I'm looking forward to it.
So, in our email, I said no fluffy interviews, but I think it'd be a good idea to start by getting to know you a little bit. So, tell me a little about yourself outside of the world of writing and
Well,
reading.
outside of the world of writing, I am an editor professionally. I work for a neurosurgical journal. So that's very technical editing, definitely not fantasy fiction, any of that. But it's great work. I get to travel and talk to neurosurgeons, so that's pretty neat. Some of my, other things that I like to do, I play the harp, I paint. I was a studio art minor, and everyone always asked me why I didn't want to go into art professionally. And basically, the story there was I was like, well, I like stability and benefits. So, um, but I still try to paint, on my downtime when I'm not writing or running around like a crazy person with my head cut off, trying to do this whole adulting thing.
Right.
Um, what else other than that? Boy, those are like the big, hobbies that I engage in outside of the world of writing. But I try to keep things limited to that just because it's such a time consuming thing. Um,
Right.
one of the my twin sister's also a writer, and we've both heard the mantra, if you're a writer you should write every day type thing over and over again. And honestly, I just I understand the intention behind that, but I just don't think it's practical for most writers who aren't doing it as a full-time
Yeah.
job. And
Mhm.
if I was one of those people giving me that advice today, I would change it to write as much as you can, and make
Yeah.
it a priority. But groceries need to be bought, and sometimes you get home from work and you are just completely fried, and that's fine. It doesn't make you any less of a writer. Um,
Yeah. It's less the everyday than what Ray Bradbury once said. Quality breed or quantity breeds quality. If you don't write often, you will never be good.
Yeah,
It's more
yeah,
about amount.
yeah. But what that often is, can vary from person to person.
You may not be
If
able to
you
write for like
are the
two
kind of
days, but then you have that one day where you're like, all right, I feel like
yeah,
writing today. And, you're at
yeah,
your laptop for 6 hours.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I definitely it can be hard to make it a priority. It's very easy to come home from work and get on YouTube and just watch stupid videos of people eating 10,000
Hmm.
calories. Um,
Hmm.
and so maybe that's not a good use of your time, but nobody's a robot, and
Yeah.
you just need to do the best you can. But anyway, I try to write as much as I'm able to, and I am one of
Yeah.
those lucky people who writes pretty quickly. But
Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
I I require a lot of editing and revising, so I kind of pay for it that way.
Yeah. I have 3 kids, so it gets worse.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't imagine. I can't imagine at all having to
But
balance
3 kids
that as
under
well.
4.
Bless your heart. Wow, that's awesome.
we think we're done. We'll see.
Careful, don't say that too loud.
Okay, so we've gone into the writing realm. So I sent you a couple of things you'd be thinking about. So, what is
Mhm.
the first story that you remember loving?
You mean in terms of like books that I was familiar with
It,
reading, or
anything like the first thing that I was kind of obsessed with was the story of David and Goliath. Like my mom
yeah.
had this really smooth rock that she got from Crater Lake before I was born, and I would stick that in a sock and just walk around my house just swinging it around my head because David was the coolest person in the world to me
Right.
when I was like 3 years old.
That's
He's still up
awesome.
there, but
That's
so
awesome.
anything.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that comes to mind, probably two things. My parents are very literate, and got us reading early, and so on my mom's side, she was more into the fairy tales, the fiction, and she would read to us out of James Herriot's Treasury for Children. I don't know if you're familiar at all with James Herriot,
I think I
but
might be actually.
I'm sorry.
I think I might be actually. I was
Yeah,
homeschooled, so
the
got exposed to all kinds of weird books
yeah, the
and
British vet.
collections and stuff.
Yeah, so he was a British vet about during World War II, and just loved those stories. I was animal obsessed, still am. But
Mm.
they were just such charming stories of cows and cats and sheep, and we would just crawl into the rocking chair. It was me and my twin sister, and my mom always loves to regale that we would try to push each other off so we could have more space. So she would read aloud to us from that, and we would just ask for it over and over again. And on my dad's side, he's very science fiction. So when we would go backpacking, he would bring Isaac Asimov's I, Robot and read that
Oh,
to us around the fire. So
you were
definitely
how
got
old when
both.
you were hearing Asimov?
Oh gosh, I'd have to ask him when he started reading that to us, but definitely, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Wow,
I mean,
I did.
I
I did
started
not read
reading.
that until like 3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, it's very good. Well, I mean, we my I was very much the book nerd. I mean, I was carrying
Mm.
around Jack London's anthology in fifth grade, and it was just my dad's leather-bound copy with the gold leaf. It was such a big deal, and that was me at 10. So, we read my sister and I read Battlefield Earth in the sixth grade, I think. So,
Then
my dad
saw the
always was
movie and
very
suffered just enormous disappointment.
um, that's a thick one. That was an intense book. Didn't always understand the words, but anyway, the bigger the book, the better. And my parents definitely tried to keep us from reading anything too adult too early.
Right.
But they definitely were like, let's whatever you want to read, let's figure out if it's too big right now, let's find a kids version. Although there weren't that many of that in our house. But
Yeah.
yeah, James Herriot, Isaac Asimov, those are like the first early stories. Probably the first books I ever got like truly obsessed with were Lord of the Rings. Maybe that's a
Mm.
cliche answer, but by sixth grade, I discovered Tolkien, and I just went nuts. And
Right.
every iteration I could possibly put my hands on
Yeah.
um,
Did you
was.
see Christopher Tolkien passed away like a week ago,
I
which is very sad.
did, I
But
did.
last summer he finally released a novelization of Baron and Luthien.
Yes, I have it.
You do? Okay.
Yes, my family is has been very, very good about feeding my Tolkien obsession. So I collect
And
different
it's
editions of Lord of the Rings and the
mm,
Silmarillion and all that. So yeah, I've got a whole stack of Christopher Tolkien's releases that I still need to go through. But
right.
yeah, that one's
There's a
on the
lot
top
of
of the pile. Yeah, yeah, definitely sorry we won't see any more of that. But he did such an amazing thing for all of us fans by redistributing his dad's work. I can't imagine what that must have been like to go through.
I hadn't looked into it too much, but I know that he was actually like handpicked by his dad to handle all of his notes and stuff. Do you know if he picked anybody to if Christopher picked somebody to hand it off to?
I don't know. I didn't. I saw the news go by very briefly. And of course, the headline was like "End of an era." So whether that was clickbait or maybe that's it. I don't really know. But um, if we never get anything else, we've been given so much, so I don't think any of us can complain. If they do find any more notes, it might be cool for them to just publish them as is, but
You
I
think
guess
eight
that'll be up
thousand
to the.
years of fictional history is enough?
Yeah, yeah. No, we must have more. I guess that'll be up to the Tolkien estate, and I know that they're very protective, justifiably so,
Yeah.
of that whole thing. So yeah, passing of a Titan, truly.
So what are some of the stories that you remember being obsessed with? Like bordering on you wanted to write fan fiction for it, and you started writing stories that were kind of influenced by it. It could even be silly stuff. Like for a year, just Pirates of the Caribbean was just in my head constantly, and because it was just so exciting. Like I left the theater when I saw that one, and the guy I saw it with, he goes, I don't know what it was, but that movie just made me want to like write. And he
Yeah.
wasn't even a writer. It was weird.
Yeah. Boy, well, I've never really done fan fiction. I got started writing my own stories at like 11. So, but I will preface that by saying that a bunch of my early writing ripped off my favorite authors so much it might as well have been fan fiction. Lord of the Rings was definitely up there. There was probably the first fantasy novels I ever read were, oh God, I don't even remember the name of the author. It's on my bookshelf, but Into the Land of the Unicorns. Um, was a pair of books at my elementary school library, and really neat idea, kind of exploring the portals between worlds and parallel dimensions essentially. And this girl gets sucked into a different land where there are unicorns that can speak, and there's a battle going on to destroy them. And anyway, I was really taken by that idea, and that kind of was the first time I'd ever read anything fantasy related. And the beginning of my very, very first book that I ever wrote, I was very heavily influenced by that, by Lord of the Rings. Um, unicorns and fantastical creatures that I made up, and a quest for to get to the evil lord's lair. And it was very very strongly influenced by those. So those are probably the first ones. And the Into the Land of the Unicorns is still, I've actually read it recently as an adult. It's a good kids book. Unfortunately, I think I'd have to double check. So, author of the book, if you're still alive, I apologize, but I do believe that he passed away and never finished the series.
Oh
Um,
no.
in any case, there was two books, and I've never found the third because I looked for it a few years ago because I was like, "Ah, I never know what happened with the war, and it just doesn't exist that I've been able to find." So anyway, yeah, the first novel I ever wrote, very fantasy-esque, griffins, unicorns, and
I love griffins. There's not enough griffin fiction out there.
there
It's all
really
about dragons and
isn't.
unicorns, and
Yeah,
griffins are
those are the
awesome.
big ones. They're pretty
What
fantastic. So, uh,
what's your favorite iteration of a griffin? Just the straight lion with wings, or like the Quest for Camelot, literally half eagle, half lion?
I saw I, at the height of my fantasy obsession in middle school, I used to print out picked art from anybody I could find who had fairy tale and fantasy art. And I went through a Griffin phase, and there was an artist who had created a blue jay Griffin,
Ooh,
which beautiful, beautiful art because it was all blues and whites and blacks, but it had these bright red eyes, and this kind of gray puma like lion half. And oh, it was gorgeous. It was unique. I'd never seen anything like that using
yeah.
other birds that you might not anticipate. um, and then I don't know if you've ever seen this. I think this was recent art. Someone did a series of griffins if they were made with kind of derpy birds like pigeons and crows, and oh my gosh, they're so funny. The pigeon one in particular was pretty great. So you know, after this interview, go Google pigeon griffin and see what happens. I think you won't be disappointed.
Will do. I'm looking at Blue Jay Griffin right now, and it's pretty cool.
Oh gosh, I wonder if the
there's
same
there's
one came
there's a
up.
lot of art. We got sidetracked by griffins, so magical
Right.
creatures and that kind of thing. All right, moving on. Next, inside of your inspiration journey.
God, I can't. Let's see. Those are like the I've stayed in fantasy for a really long time, and probably one of the downsides of starting writing so young is I kind of got stuck in the working on the same book forever. I mean, it wasn't until college that I finally moved on to something else, because I was in the endless rewrite, as I was trying to get that book up to speed with what I was learning,
Right.
and experimenting with. So I wrote the first two books of this, what was going to be a quartet, at 11 and 12, and then spent the next decade trying to get them somewhere I was happy with them. And the first book, I finally just let go and put down, and it's pretty much where I want it to be. I think it's as good as it's ever going to be. I've joked about going back to them But at this point, I'm just trying to move forward with other stories and other ideas. Um, but I was really Ursula K. Le Guin is another amazing
Mm.
author that I started reading. Her Wizard of Earthsea books, and my dad gave me a copy of The Left Hand of Darkness at one point, which that was the first book of hers that I read, which kind of blended sci-fi and mythology together. It's a very interesting book, and she's got such a gorgeous writing style where you feel like you're reading a fantasy novel and a science fiction novel at the same time. I've never read any other author who does that so seamlessly. Um, and so her take on wizards and their connection to the earth and nature, um, was I that was the first time. You see that a lot in kind of traditional fairy tales, but
Yeah.
that really, the way she worked on it, and your name having power and people having power over you if they learn your true name, that I thought was the coolest thing ever. And so she has definitely been a big influence on me with her writing, and also just some of her her interviews. She's got a very um polarizing views, I think, sometimes. She's definitely a strong personality, but some of her views on writing and being a writer, I think, are very important to read, whether you agree with them or not. No matter where you're coming from. But um, let's see what else. God, so many books. It's like, when someone asks you to pick your favorite book and you immediately go blank, you're like, it's tons.
What
Um,
genre are we talking here?
Yeah, yeah. Well, fantasy primarily, science fiction
Mm.
as a secondary. Isaac Asimov, particularly in the science fiction realm, he's probably my favorite.
He's
Um,
what I read the Foundation trilogy for the first time
oh,
2 years ago,
so good,
and
so good.
pause for a second until my freezer stops. Okay. Um, he, and the one thing I was amazed at is how much of that book is just conversations, and
Yeah,
you're so riveted. Like
yeah,
very little happens in the actual text. Like you hear about these wars and stuff going on, but you never see even a fight really. But
yeah,
you're just hearing people talk about stuff. It's just so interesting that I feel like that's a sign of a good writer if he can make stuff that if it was on film, you'd be like, wow, that's kind of this is very just people sitting in a room talking.
yeah,
But when you're reading it,
absolutely.
you can't let it go.
Oh, he's fantastic. I need to reread those books before. There was talk of a TV show coming out about the Foundation trilogy,
Yeah,
um, but I haven't heard anything about it recently. But yeah, those I remember just devouring those. So good. And I don't know if
because
you've
they're
ever
so easy
read
to
his.
read too.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if you've ever read his Caves of Steel
Mm.
books with the detective Elijah Bailey and R. Daniel Olivaw, but those are fantastic as well. Um, those are a bit more not I guess not adventure, but they're also very people talking in a room, but there's an element of a mystery to be solved, a murder to be handled, and the human versus robot element is very interesting there because you've got a anti-robot agoraphobic human detective who's been partnered with a robot detective, and their relationship as it grows as they go through these mysteries
That
are
sounds more like
pretty.
the iRobot movie than iRobot does.
Yes, yeah, I was really disappointed in the movie. I liked it the first time I saw it, but then, it was one of those movies that the more I thought about it, I was more dissatisfied because there are so many good short stories in iRobot
Yeah,
that,
they didn't make any of them.
yeah, well, they leaned a little bit on the very last story, but of the stories in iRobot, I think that one, um, the most unique part of that story was yet again the people talking in a room and figuring out the
Mm-hmm.
psychology of what's going on with why this robot has decided to suddenly hold humanity hostage. And that was like the
Yeah,
whole focus of the movie, and it lost all of the psychology, all of the conversation. I mean, the I thought the Ender's Game movie. had the same failing, where they tried to focus all on the action, which was surprisingly little, and lost all of the kid genius. This is what he's going through, with all of these mind games, and they just didn't capture any of that. And so the movie, I felt, was rather weak, by
Yeah,
comparison to the books. So
yeah.
yeah,
It's one of the
any writer.
hate those adaptations where you watch it and you just think, um, you don't know why people like this, do you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or trying to make it relevant. Probably my least favorite movie adaptation of a book, which I probably feel so strongly about it because this, now I'm thinking of it, this was another book that was uh so important to me, was Ella Enchanted,
Oh yeah.
which the movie just wants to make me vomit, frankly. The only similarity is that there's a girl and she happens to be enchanted to have to do whatever anyone tells her to. But the unicorn, the mini skirt, the go-go boots, the dance number at the end, I was just, oh, it was terrible, just terrible, and missed all of the really lovely fantasy elements, that the book has. And
It's hard to
that
complain too much though when you get to see Carrie Elwes do anything ever
yeah, sort of, maybe. I will never recover from that movie. It was
though.
scarring. So
When I finally read the book, one of the worst adaptations I think ever, honestly, was the Black Cauldron. Like, have you read the Prydain series?
I boy, I feel like I have, maybe not the whole series, probably the first book. I loved the cartoon, but I
Uh,
came to the cartoon first.
yeah,
Um,
well, me too. But so the movie actually is like it's kind of an amalgamation of the first three books in the series.
yeah, that
But
makes
so
sense.
imagine that Harry Potter had been adapted, and made they got rid of Voldemort completely and made Wormtail the main villain. Like
Oh
that's
my
literally
gosh.
what they did in the Black Cauldron. The Horned King, as horrifying as he is in that movie, was the assistant.
Oh no. Okay, I gotta go and read
Yeah,
those books again now. Okay.
yeah. The main villain
Fantastic.
is not even in the movies. It's weird.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, well, adding that to my reading list to go back, because I remember seeing, having the first book. Um, at one point, I think I got it from the library, but honestly, I don't remember anything about it. Probably because I was such a fan of the cartoon, but that was um, very long, many years ago. So I need to go back and redo that. And I haven't seen the movie either in a really long time. Uh, so okay, well, good. I will go and compare and get back to you on that.
There's Disney Plus now, so it's on there.
Oh, goodness gracious. That's one thing that, yet again, trying to preserve as much time as I can writing. I don't have any streaming whatsoever.
I have
They
three
need to
kids. That
bundle.
was
There's too
a
many.
necessary purchase.
Yes, I understand that entirely.
Not for me yet at all. Uh,
What? You haven't watched The Mandalorian or anything?
oh no, I
Baby Yoda?
have.
Okay. That's one thing I'm kind of feeling that I'm falling behind on that. Everyone I know has watched it, and
I haven't finished it yet. Me and my wife actually only just watched the first um, three episodes. 'Cause one thing that they don't warn you when you have a kid is that for a little while you actually stop. Like you hear about how parents like the only movies I've seen in the past like 2 years are kids movies, but oddly enough you stop kind of wanting to watch more serious stuff because you kind of just don't want it. It's like
yeah,
you don't want to see darkness when you're trying to raise a kid. I don't know what it is. It's this weird psychology thing, but
yeah.
like
Well, I imagine
my
it's,
wife
I
loves my wife loves true crime stuff, but once she like in the first couple of months after having any of our kids, she's like, I can't listen to this stuff. It's stressing me out right now
yeah,
because I don't want anything to happen to my baby.
yeah. No, I understand that entirely. Uh, not I've never had, kids, but nephews now in the family, and the closest I've come to that was right after I got married. For a good 3 years, anytime I got on a plane by myself, I was like, please don't crash, please don't crash. I have a husband to go home to. Never, I grew up flying. I'm not actually afraid of flying, but it's, suddenly there's more to
Suddenly it
your
matters.
life than just you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I imagine with a kid, that's got to be just like tenfold. So,
Hmm.
yeah, all light, fluffy stuff. Very good.
Finally, moving into the realm of writing, how many books would you say that you have written, finished? Um,
Finished. Well, I'm
not
working.
set, not put the pen down, but like you've reached the ending of writing that book and at least gotten to the revision phase.
Right. Well, I would say seven.
Okay.
Um, I have self-published two. I have one, two, three sitting with my agent. Is that correct? Yes, my agent has three. I'm currently working on the rewrites for the latest one, which I'm almost done with that. Um, and then my very first fantasy novel, which
Okay.
I may go back to someday just to look at it, but it is for all purposes done. And technically the sequel is two, but I never got into the editing stage, so I don't really consider that one to be finished.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, seven books total.
Okay.
Um, and for that really started, like I said, in college. I wrote my very first novel at 11, and then just kept working on it, working on it, working on it. And
Yeah.
in college, I was, still I was sending it out to literary agents, publishers. I mean, I can't imagine how many. I stopped counting at about 60 packages that I sent out, that I actually received a response for. And there are many, many publishers and agents who, they receive so many unsolicited submissions that they only respond if they're even interested. So um, I have no idea how many queries I sent out, but I had an internship with a children's publisher when I was in college, and ironically enough, the best part of that internship was talking with the secretary. Who
Mm.
I feel horrible. I don't even remember her name. She was also an author, and she was so kind. She, took the first chapter of my book and read it and gave me advice. And one of the things she advised me to do was start something completely different. You've been stuck in this book for the greater portion of your writing life. Do something else and see what happens. And one of my favorite genres has always been rewritten fairy tales. So I was like, okay, let me try that. And so I decided to start rewriting, doing my own rewritten fairy tales, and I kind of haven't stopped. And until last year, I was writing a book a year, and that was kind of my goal and my internal timeline. And last couple of years with this latest book have kind of uh, uh, derailed that timeline just because this latest novel, I've always sat firmly in fantasy, and this one is kind of a heavier science fiction mix, and that's a new genre for me to get into. So
Yeah.
the story took longer to write. The rewrites are a bit more intense, but that I kind of haven't looked back since then. And I have it's been the best advice I ever received, just to get me out of that rut that I was stuck in. And
Th-
I've
Those publishing secretaries are good to listen to. That's why Harry Potter exists.
absolutely, they are not to be discounted at all. And no, I need to look her up at some point if I can. I don't. I had a bookmark with her name on it at one point. But if you're out there, thank you. um, just it's so easy to get stuck doing the same thing over and over again, especially if you're kind of an editor by nature, which professionally and otherwise, I really am. And it's so easy to kind of fixate on one thing and try to constantly perfect it. And at some point, you just got to move on and let it go, and it's going to be what it's going to be. And um, that's a hard habit to break. And
Yeah.
uh,
I was in the same boat in high school. I was working on the same novel for the entire thing, and I never really moved
yeah,
past a certain point because I got into the fixing rut where I would
yeah,
go back and read previous chapters and tweak them. And the first 10 chapters were fantastic by the time I was
yeah.
done with them. I think I haven't reread it in a while because my computer had a tendency to delete things, and so I actually
Oh
do not have
no.
access to that story anymore. That's
Wow.
actually what made me move on. But so the book that I'm working on right now, I've told myself I'm not rewriting anything. I'm
Hmm.
getting to the end first, and then I will go back and
Yeah.
reread stuff. It's very difficult because sometimes because I would use it as like a substitute for actually writing, which
Hmm.
I was writing, but it's like I don't know where the story's gonna go. I guess I'll just go back, and that counts as writing it, right?
Yeah. Oh, I sympathize with that so much. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and it's you can tweeze something to death. I mean, um, not to get ahead too much, but in Shifted, I was reading it for this interview again, and the first I can feel it in the first 3 pages how much time I spent trying to get those first paragraphs
Mm-hmm.
perfect. And you know, I haven't ever, any of the people who've read it have, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it, when we get to that part, but no one's ever pointed that out to me. But for me, I'm like, it's almost a sterile kind of writing as compared to what I think are the strongest parts of that book, because I just tried so hard to make it perfect and grabbing
Mm-hmm.
but you know, it you can edit something to death, and at some point you just have to let your voice speak for itself. And which isn't to say that good editing and good revising isn't incredibly important, but there's only so much you can do at the end of the day. um, and moving on and moving forward to new ideas. And if you have a new idea, you don't need to cram it into the current book. Maybe it belongs in a different book. I used to do that in my fantasy novel all the time. I had this new idea and it really doesn't fit, but I'm gonna make it work. And the first iteration had like 40 characters who got introduced and then killed off 2 pages later because I didn't have anywhere for them to go, but I liked the idea. Oh, I was
The
vicious.
Shakespeare method.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Or the George R. R. Martin.
Shakespeare's one of the great writers, but I swear there are times when he killed people off just because he was like, "And I don't have anything else for them to do, so they're dead
Yeah,
now."
I wouldn't argue with that.
um, yeah, I wrote a musical with a friend of mine. Good gosh, we did that 10 years ago this year. And the whole thing is it takes place backstage opening night of a Broadway show, and just everything, absolutely everything, is going wrong. It was a lot of fun, but he and I had a cameo in it where we come into the director and we tell her that in the midst of all this, we found some parts in the script that need tweaking, and she just throws us out of her office. And,
Awesome.
and as we're walking out, he's just like, "Oh, that was rude." And my line was, "I told you it was time to put the pen down." He said, "There's no such thing as a perfect script." And my line was, "But there is such a thing as a finished script." So I think that's actually accidentally pretty good advice. It
Yes, I want
might
that
not
on
be
a
perfect, but
t-shirt.
it might be done. So was Shifted? Was that your first foray into this new um, world for you?
Yes, it was. And I wrote that in 2013, uh, and had just a blast with it. And
Yeah.
um, I still remember, Beauty and the Beast is probably one of my favorite fairy tales. Robin McKinley's Beauty is my very favorite version of it.
I
Robin
think my
McKinley is
sister
one of
really
my
likes that
favorite
one.
authors. I'm sorry?
I think my sister really likes that one.
Yeah. Oh, it's good. It's really well. I love Robin McKinley in general. Her voice and her writing style is one what I would aspire to in the fantasy realm. Obviously, I don't want to write just like her because then I would be Robin McKinley. But she's got one of the best fantasy uh, voices, I think, especially for retold fairy tales. And that book, I remember, thinking if I'm going to do a retold fairy tale, okay, we can start with that one because it's my favorite. But what
Right.
what haven't I seen yet? And
Mm.
I've read Beauty and the Beast done in different countries and different timelines, but I'd only ever read one other gender swapped Beauty and the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
It was Persian, actually, and the Beast character had been turned into a lion. Um, Very interesting, kind of a weird book, to be perfectly frank. Um,
Is it
Possibly some.
like an old? Persian myth, or was it more of a, or was it a
No,
modern
it
book?
was a modern a modern book. I yet again don't remember the author. They all blur together after one point.
Right.
But it was set in, an older Middle Eastern setting. Couldn't give you an exact date or an exact country, but the main thing that was unique about it, not only the culture and the timeline was, but that it wasn't a girl gets trapped in castle with a guy who she falls in love with who happens to be a beast. It was the reverse. Um, and so I was like, I wonder what it would be like to do the traditional Beauty and the Beast story, but with the genders swapped. What would that do to the characters and in the interactions therein? And so that was kind of the basis of what I wanted to do there. Um, and one of the other things that's always dissatisfied me about the Beauty and the Beast story is, who was it really who cursed, the Beast character in the first place? In the very traditional story, it was some old witch, who came knocking at the door, and this noble man sends her away, and she curses him to learn humility. Great, wonderful moral, very Grimm's fairy tale esque. But
Mhm.
to me, that's a very dissatisfying portion of the story that I wanted to know more about. And
Yeah.
that is why Robin Mathdun and Eyeless and Mitis play such an important side story in my
Yeah.
version. I really wanted to know what happened, what caused this, and was that the end? Was it not? Do they come back? Are they interested in what's happening to their curse in the interim? So I really wanted to explore that, and that was
Yeah.
great fun. So I mean, my favorite scenes, frankly, in Shifted have to do with Robin. He's such a delightful creep.
I could tell, actually. Like it's
Yeah,
like this subconscious thing that it's like, they had fun writing
yeah,
this.
yeah. I would love to go back and do Eyeless and Mitis's story in particular, and maybe even Robin's. But when it comes to Robin, I fear that if I went back to him, I wouldn't be able to capture the initial attitude that made him so much fun, for me to write, and I wouldn't want to cheapen his character. So I think he's done. I don't know if I'll go back to the other two or not. They make cameos, very very brief cameos, in a couple other of my books, and Mitis actually shows up pretty prompt. What's the word I'm looking for?
Prominently.
Thank you. Prominently. I was thinking promptly, and that was not it at all. Clearly, I need
Okay.
another cup
I was
of
like, is
coffee.
it prominently? Because she was almost there.
Prominently, yes. In another of my fairy tales. Uh, but they haven't shown up in a minute. So that was kind of the grain of what I was going for with just the outline of Shifted. And then I
Yeah.
kind of just let it go from there.
Okay. So are you an outliner, or are you a discovery writer?
A little bit of both. I never used to outline, but I found it eventually just made a lot of sense with getting things done, and figuring out, okay, I kind of have a 10 chapter formula that I do just to help me make sure that I don't end up with a 40-page chapter and a 2-page chapter. That was a problem I always struggled with my early writing, was speeding through a scene and then taking way too long on a different one. So I don't think I outlined Shifted on the first go, uh, but it ended up kind of falling into 12 chapters. I wanted it to feel like, counting backwards from a clock. So that's where 12 came from. And even the chapter titles are just 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. And the Beauty and the Beast story is all kind of about time and time running out. But every book that I've written since then has been a nice, tidy 10 chapters. Um, and that helps me, like I said, kind of just pace the story a bit. And so I'll write out an initial, very rough outline, like this is where we need to start, this is where we need to end, and here's what's going to happen in between. I don't necessarily plan out every single page. I don't plan out every single
Yeah.
scene. But I'll figure out, okay, each chapter needs to have this happen, and we need to get to this point at the end of each one. Go. So so it's good to have a structure just so that I don't kind of go go nuts. But I also like to be able to discover things as I go with the writing. And I usually have I've kind of gotten into I have a couple of beta readers who will read each chapter as I go along to try to find plot holes or things that don't
Right.
just make sense. I also find that gives me a really good motivation to keep writing because someone's waiting on me for the next
Right.
portion of the story. And then my twin sister, who's also an editor and a writer, she edits the whole thing at the end before
Okay.
it goes to my agent. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so that's become my the way things go, and it's a great formula for me to work through. It keeps me moving. It
Mhm.
keeps me organized. And also, now that I've got an agent and he's kind of got like a, you need to shoot for this many words to stay within the young adult realm. It also helps me um, not write a 130,000 word book, which is always that's what I kind of crave to do. Um, so, the young adult genre really needs to kind of stick between 80 and 100. Um,
Well, for the long one, that's when you break into not young adult. That's when you use your married name as the
yeah,
pen name. So it's like now you're a
right,
different person.
right, absolutely. Yeah, nobody will get the connection there.
From the author of No, he's not. No, she's
Totally
not.
different person. What aren't you talking about? Yeah.
Oh wait, no, I do recognize his voice. Um,
This is strangely familiar.
so what was it about Shifted? You said that you sent like 60 something packages for your first novel. So what was it about this one that made you decide to forego that, or maybe you tried and then self-published it?
Yeah, well, I sent a few of this off, but because by the time I'd finished it, I was already moving on to the next book. I didn't really, have the time to just print out
Hmm.
packages and send them off. Um, and so I was already moving on to the next book, and I had discovered this amazing platform called Agent Query. It's this great website. Whenever I have somebody else wanting to get into publishing come to me and they're like, how do I start, I always send them to this website because it's like the Google for agents and publishers. And that's how I found my agent, was through Agent Query. But for Shifted, like I said, I just didn't have as much time. I was starting to feel a little bit more impatient because I'd been trying to get a publishing deal since I was 11 years old.
Right.
And also, probably
You're
the
also
biggest,
inspired by Christopher Paolini,
oh gosh, yeah, I kind of hated him a little bit in the
right? Right.
way. Yeah, I got his Aragon, and my dad was like, yeah, he was 13 or however old he was when he wrote it. And I just remember being so jealous. But it did help that his parents self published it initially. Um,
Mm,
got his foot in the door there, and but then it got picked up. Obviously, I don't want to cheapen
yeah.
his accomplishment at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was definitely feeling kind of the burn there. But
I
my
think I
first,
probably critically read that book, or read that book more critically than just about any other book I'd ever read in my
yeah,
life.
yeah,
Just like,
I
well, he shouldn't
definitely,
have done this.
yeah, I definitely felt that way about the second and the third book. The first book I loved, and thought it was a very, very well done. But I was very harsh on the second and third book. I never even read the fourth one. He kind of lost me with some of the love bits in the
Oh
in the
gosh,
in the
his
third book.
romantic dialogue was so bad.
Yeah, it was really, yeah, the as soon as he said, "How could you do this to me?" to the elf girl, I was like, "Nope, nope, not mm-mm. Nobody edited this properly." And I do think that that might, I mean, obviously speaking without knowledge, I think that might have been what happened, where the first book was such a success that he was kind of given free reign for
Mm,
the next ones, and they
yeah,
weren't as good. Editing is important, and
yeah.
having people push you and question your ideas. I mean, my books have gotten so much better since working with my agent.
Right.
But probably the biggest thing that pushed me to self-publish Shifted was my first job out of college. I was working at this small publishing company, and my
Mm,
coworker self-published her books. And she and I still meet weekly. We get tea, we talk about our writing, what's going on in our world. And She I was really curious as to, what she was doing and how she was doing it, and she really helped me along in figuring out the whole Amazon platform, how to go about it. She's been such an incredible source of um, support and teaching to me.
Mm.
Um, and so that was kind of where I got the idea of, well, if I'm constantly writing new books, it's not like I'm not going to have something to send to an agent. I still want to pursue traditional
Yeah.
publishing. And more now, you're starting to see the crossover of people who get self-published then pick up a
Yeah.
traditional publishing deal. There's less of a stigma all the time. I'm not saying it's, not there by some publishers, but it's getting better. Um,
Yeah.
and so I was like, there's no harm in self-publishing this book and just seeing what happens. And
Yeah.
there is something a little demoralizing about writing books that nobody ever sees. Um, Not that I've had the most incredible sales, online. I don't really promote my books much just because I don't have a
Yeah.
whole lot of time. But now it's there. If someone asks me, "Oh, you're a writer. I'd love to read your stuff," I can say, "Well, you can go on Amazon and find these too."
You
Um,
have 5 ratings on Goodreads. That's something.
yeah. Oh, really? Fantastic. I've only ever seen the reviews on Amazon, so I don't know if Goodreads pulls from there at all. But that's good to know. Um,
I, I
so
think there were
yeah.
I think there were 2 reviews and like 5 starred ratings.
Oh, fun. Well, hopefully they're good.
You're at like 4.2 average, I
That's not bad. I'll take it. I will
think.
take it.
So how did the how has self publishing that one gone monetarily?
Oh.
Like, or copies? How many have you sold? Do you know?
Oh, far less than 50. Like I said, I don't
That's
promote
fine.
it. I mean, I couldn't honestly tell you just because I don't really track it. I'd have to go run reports in the KDP Amazon self-publishing thing. I have not made very much money at all. I obviously know that if I just, put some money into advertising it, my friend Amanda DeWeese, she gets a shout out. She's also on Amazon. She does has had very good success with book bubs, where you put your self published book on sale and they will advertise it for you. They're
I'm in
pricey.
that newsletter.
Oh, you are? Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they can be very expensive. They can, be $300 to $1,000 for a slot, but they almost always get you your money back. But for me, I'm at a position in my career where I just don't have any money to put into it, and
Right.
I don't feel bad about that at all. I do all the covers myself. My editor, my sister, is very. I told her that she's got a backlog of payments that I owe her for the work that she does. So if I ever decide, okay, I'm gonna take a chance and put some money into it, that's probably what I'll do. But right now, it's not so much a priority to me to make a living off my books. I just love the writing. And mostly I want it to just be available. If someone does want to buy it, wants to read it, wants to leave me a rating, cool. But I still dream of having a traditional publishing
Right.
contract. That's always been something I wanted. I haven't given up on it yet.
Mm.
And if ever I did give up on that dream, stopped working with my agent, which we've been going 5 years now, and are still really keen on working together and making this happen. So I don't foresee that happening anytime soon. But if I ever did decide self-publishing is how it's going to be for me, then I probably would start putting some money into it and really
Yeah.
trying to get the sales up there.
Yeah. Which do that enough, and then it leads to a publishing deal. You never know.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I try to hold it all very loosely, just because publishing is so fickle. And
Yeah.
even some of the great names out there, uh, they may be made as much money as they will ever need on a series or a few books, but then nothing. Even J.K. Rowling with her mystery novel that she put out under a different name. Um,
Mm.
did horribly until the publishers revealed it was her, and then all of a sudden it sold. So,
Yeah.
it's just there's so much content coming out all the time that it's really hard, I think. And I think it's like this everywhere. You know, you hear all the time there's no such thing as a 40-year career anymore. And I think that's
Mhm.
true in every walk of life. Writing,
Yeah.
you know, professional world, musicians, just, you know, there's just, we're in a different world now where you can get access to everything all the time. Um, so it makes it harder, I think, to sustain a career in any one way. Um,
Yeah. It's getting strange for being an artist these days.
yeah,
My mom has told me that the song "Africa" by Toto.
yeah,
Um, we all love that song, but it's extra special to her because it was the hit song on the radio around the time that she first met my dad. And so
right.
whenever she hears it, she thinks about that era of her life, and a lot of people think about that era of their lives. I believe that'd be 82.
Hmm.
And because art has become so broken now, nobody's listening to the same songs anymore. Like, I did not listen to any modern music at all until like I graduated high school.
Right.
Um, and but then the song "Somebody That I Used to Know" came out, and that I think that's the first. I think that's the only song I can think of. Maybe "Hello" by Adele, but those are like two of the only songs that have just broken through the wall to where everybody was listening to it at the same time. And so
Yeah.
it's one of those weird things that's one of the few times recently that we all have a that there's a time connection to a piece of art anymore.
Yeah.
Movies are still managing to do that, but
Right, but there's fewer of them, you know, there's
mhm,
only so many big blockbusters that can come out at a
mhm,
time. And you know, now with music online and on the radio, I mean, radio is kind of starting to struggle. And
I'm always surprised when I hear people still listen to it. Honestly,
yeah, me too. I I I for a while I was listening to the radio on my commute into work, but then the station that I really liked went offline, and
mhm,
there's a different station that plays classic rock that I used to really enjoy, but I got sick and tired of hearing the same 10 songs
right?
over again plus commercials. So
Yep.
so yeah, and you know, we also, I think, live in the iPod generation. You know,
Mhm,
people used to listen to albums, and you know, they could say, "Oh, my favorite album by this artist," and
right.
I can't I can't do that. You know,
Mhm,
I know my favorite songs, and I've maybe listened to full albums back to back. But I have to make a conscious decision to do that as opposed to just having it on shuffle. And so I think that has fractured a lot of the intake of our media as well.
mhm. So publishing is getting weird because I mean, it was very rare that you had a book that um, was like the book everybody had to read. Harry Potter obviously was probably the most recent one.
Yeah, I think so.
But now it's become so because the genres have become so split that
Yeah.
it depends on what you read. Like, I think
Oh
Girl on the
yeah.
Train was really big when that one came out, but I don't keep up with the mystery world, so it had been out for like
Mm-mm.
3 years before I heard about it.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well, and
the
it's changed so much. You know, I was talking with my agent about this when we were discussing possible revisions and rewrites for my latest book because it is more science fiction. And I wrote it in the style of the classics, Asimov and Frank
Mhm,
Herbert and you know, Philip K. Dick and all of those people, Ursula K. Le Guin, because that's what I read and that's what I loved and that's what I still think science fiction is.
mhm.
But my agent, he was actually Frank Herbert's editor.
Oh
So,
gosh.
you know, oh yeah, I still don't know how I managed to start working with him. It's kind of an amazing thing that I try not to think too hard about because it's I get
It
very
might go away.
it might go away. I get very intimidated because he'll throw out, "Oh yeah, I was having a conversation with Ursula K. Le Guin one time, and we were arguing about this," and I'm just like, okay." But
You
anyway, we were
argued
talking about,
with?
yeah, yeah. But he was talking about how, like, all of those people, the classic science fiction writers that we know and love, if they were trying to break into science fiction today, they wouldn't make it because the genre has changed. It's gotten so political, so cynical in a
Oh yeah.
way. It's very, it's very much about kind of post-apocalyptic, uh,
Mhm.
you know, partisan thoughts and ideas. And you know, there's no politics in my book, and I don't want there to be any politics in my books. but
Yeah.
that kind of makes it a target for the sci-fi audience. So he was like, you might want, even though it's a science fiction based story, you might want to start kind of leaning back towards the young adult sci-fi and fantasy realm, just because you will get, you know, uh, really heavily scrutinized by an audience that is no longer meant for you. Um, and yeah, so and I get so annoyed when I go into bookstores and I go to the young adult uh, section, and it's gotten so formulaic. I remember
What
there was
destroyed the world this time?
yeah, or like, there was a meme that went around that was hilarious where it was like, based on your first letter of your first name and the last letter of your last name and birthday, whatever, the girl of fire and ice or the city of smoke and bone. I mean, literally, you go into any bookstore, go to the young adult section, you will find 20 titles that follow that very formula. And
Mhm.
it's a bit nauseating, to be perfectly frank.
Which
Um,
I don't remember who I heard say this, but they said that the thing about the sci-fi genre now is that it used so in the '60s it was kind of nihilistic, which was
mhm.
it, I can't read too much sci-fi from that era. I start to get really depressed.
Yeah.
Um, but then after Star Wars, and this is actually what George Lucas wanted to do. There's this amazing podcast called Inside Star Wars that it's 8 episodes, and it's about how he made Star Wars, but it starts with when
Yeah.
he was a kid. It goes through
Yeah.
his influences and everything, and it's just it's so good. But he specifically said that he was looking at movies and books and stuff, and he said nobody's making anything hopeful. I want to
Oh,
make
yeah.
something that makes people look forward to stuff and makes them feel good for a while.
Yeah.
And so after Star Wars, I think sci-fi kind of picked up again. There was like all this stuff that we grew up in the '80s and '90s of like the look, the future could be really, really, really cool and awesome. And now
Yeah.
it's all no, the future's gonna suck.
Yeah. It's like the difference between Blade Runner and Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah.
only ever seen the new Star Trek movies. I've not really I saw The Wrath of Khan, uh, but I've never really watched the TV show. My husband loves it. But that's one of the things that he describes about it the most is that it's set in a most of the problems that you see in old science fiction or in modern day, the idea is that it's idealized. We've gotten past this
Mm-hmm.
problem, or some of the problems of racism and sexism and war, and now it's about exploration and what's out
Mm-hmm.
there. And it's not based on the world has ended, now we have to go to space. It's based on we fixed things and now we have time to to find the ideal um society. And I'm not describing it super well because I haven't seen it, so I'm just hearing a description of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there was a nice bright period where science fiction started to go that way. And now more modern science fiction, especially in writing, I think less so in movies. There's still some amazing science fiction movies coming out, like Interstellar was uh, so good. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah,
Um,
well, it was kind of like an indictment of that depressing sci-fi attitude. Like even a couple of I don't remember if it was in the movie, but the trailer's monologue where he's just talking about we used to look to the stars and feel hope and all this stuff, and
yeah,
now we just keep looking at the ground and how bad things are. And so it was almost like a remember how sci-fi used to be?
yeah. Oh, it was gorgeous, and I definitely felt like it was a callback to some of the science fiction that was so beautiful. And yeah, and now today's science fiction has gotten very political science, as
Well,
opposed
maybe
to
other people are hungry for that. You should self-publish that one, and then
yeah.
it'll take off. Like The Martian is kind of like that. It did extremely well.
Yeah, I liked that one. I liked that one a
Hmm.
lot. So yeah, we'll see where this new science fiction book goes. Once I finish my rewrites, I'm gonna hand it back off to my agent, and who knows, maybe this will be the one. It's always nice when your agent's like, well, this is the kind of story that Netflix is coming to me asking for, so that's always a good thing. So I'm like, movie deal? You bet. Yeah, just get J.J. Abrams or the Nolan brothers on this. I would be all over
I It's funny too how sometimes something that doesn't sound like it's going to do super well ends up doing super well. Like I read a quote from one of the producers of Star Wars recently where he just said people do not understand how big of a risk that movie was at the
Yeah.
time. Making a sci-fi movie was a horrible idea. And
Yeah.
when we started making this movie in 1974, the highest grossing sci-fi movie of all time was 1968's 2001, and
Oh
it didn't
God.
make its money back until 1973.
Wow.
He was
Yeah.
like, yes, making a sci-fi movie with a big budget was just a horrible idea that no one should ever do in 1975.
Right. I still haven't recovered from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Talk about a
Never seen it.
weird. Oh, it's I would say
Something.
it's worth watching just for the cultural references,
Mm.
but it's I don't remember if it was actually 4 hours. It felt like 4 hours of just the weirdest psychedelic trip that happens to occur in space you could ever imagine. It's pretty bizarre and a bit disturbing at times, and the end at one point you're watching a guy dressed in white sitting in an entirely white room eat his dinner, and then he spills his wine and stares at it for 15 minutes. It's bizarre. It's really, really bizarre. So,
So I hear you
I
like it.
oh yes, loved it. Can't I watch it every weekend? No, not my favorite at all. But I have to say I am glad I watched it because there are a lot of
Yeah.
jokes and references to it that I understand now, and that was the whole reason my dad wanted us to watch it. But he did pick the last day of a Thanksgiving break in for us to do it, so I think that kind of negatively slanted us towards it as well.
Now I have to go back to work tomorrow too, and I watched this movie. Oh boy.
Yeah. I spent my last 4 hours of vacation doing this.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Caitlyn Mitchell about her influences and writing. In the next part, we get into the beginning phases of her work on Shifted, what she wanted the story to be, and how she landed on her setting, characters, and the story itself. If you want to support Miss Mitchell and her storytelling, it's as simple as purchasing her books. Shifted and The Roaring Boys are both available on Amazon.com right now. If you'd like to support this podcast, please subscribe to it on your preferred podcast deliverer, rate it, and share it with your friends. You can also become a patron on patreon.com/thinkingtoinking. We've got some interesting benefits inside of the various financial tiers. If you're a writer of a published or self-published book or viewable film or play who would like to appear on this podcast, you can email me at thinktoinkpodcast@gmail.com. From Thinking to Inking is a bookworm podcast from Corticated Entertainment. Theme music is an original composition by and property of Hannah Ausband Scheidt. She may be contacted at hannahausbandscheidt.com, HANNAHAUSBANDSCHEIDT.com.